Atlas hit the water before Lieutenant Caleb Thorne finished processing what his flashlight had just found inside the sinking patrol car. Not a vehicle that had slid off the road. Not an accident logged at 11:14 by a base security dispatch that used 8 words and closed the case before the car finished going under. A woman, bound at the wrists, chest deep in black water that was still rising. Her dark hair floating around her face as she tilted her chin up to keep her mouth above the surface. And on her left shoulder, barely visible through the glass, the Trivent. A Navy SEAL was dying in that car, one of their own. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me to the end, because what Atlas pulls from that water does not just save one life. It tears open something that was never supposed to see daylight. The call had come through the Joint Base Security Channel at 11:14 as an unattended vehicle report. Not a missing SEAL, not an officer down, not even a pursuit gone wrong. An unattended vehicle, possible road departure. No casualty confirmed. No further action required. 12 words that had been chosen by someone who understood exactly which language generated a response team and which language generated a log entry. They had chosen log entry. Lieutenant Caleb Thorne had been 3 miles from the coastal access road when it rolled across his secondary channel. He was in full NWU Type 3 digital camouflage, 24 hours into a 48-hour base-adjacent patrol rotation that he had been assigned to following a debriefing from an overseas operation that Command had flagged for administrative review. The review was not punitive. It was the institutional equivalent of putting someone in a waiting room while the people who made decisions figured out what to do with information that complicated the version of events they had already filed. He had been listening to his radio with the specific, tuned attention of someone who had been told to stay quiet and had responded by paying closer attention to everything happening around the quiet. Atlas had been in the back of the transport vehicle for 6 hours. 4 years old, German Shepherd, tan and gold coat with the black saddle markings that made him look, from a distance, like something that belonged on a calendar. Up close, the amber eyes settled that misunderstanding quickly. He had been resting against the rear door with his chin on his paws, the relaxed, energy-conserving stillness of a working dog that understood the difference between transit and deployment and was managing his resources accordingly. The moment the call came through, Atlas lifted his head. Caleb looked at him in the rear view. Atlas was not looking at the radio. He was looking at the window. His nose was pressed to the 2-inch gap at the top of the rear glass, and his nostrils were working in the rapid, tight cycles that Caleb had learned to distinguish from ordinary environmental interest in approximately the 3rd week of their partnership. That was not curiosity. That was acquisition. Atlas had found something in the air that the radio had confirmed existed, and he was already building the directional map toward it. Caleb pulled over before he made the conscious decision to do it. The coastal access road was a maintenance track that ran parallel to the base perimeter fence for about a mile before it terminated at a drainage channel that fed into the tidal basin. The channel in November ran high and fast and dark from 2 weeks of coastal rain and the kind of tidal surge that pushed everything in the basin above normal levels after midnight. He had driven this road during the day. He had never had a reason to take the maintenance track at night. Atlas gave him a reason. The dog was out of the vehicle the moment the door opened, not at a run, but at the deliberate, ground-reading pace of an animal deploying rather than reacting. His nose dropped to the ground for 2 seconds, then came up, then dropped again, building the composite picture that his training and 4 years of field work had taught him to construct from the intersecting layers of what he was reading. His body angled left, toward the channel. Caleb followed with his flashlight up and his hand already on his radio. He saw the patrol car 20 feet from the bank. It had gone in nose first and settled at a steep forward angle, the rear end still above the waterline, but dropping as the channel current worked against the frame. Base security markings on the door panel. No lights. The seal around the rear window had partially blown from the pressure differential inside. He swept his flashlight across the vehicle. Atlas was already at the rear door. He was pressed against the metal, with his nose working the blown window seal in rapid, urgent pulls, and he was making the sound that Caleb had heard 7 times in 2 years of operational partnership. Not barking. The low, continuous vocalization that had no performance in it and carried one piece of information in every frequency it produced. There is someone alive in this vehicle. Caleb went into the water. The channel was cold in the specific, penetrating way of coastal water in November that had been absorbing weeks of cold nights and had run out of warmth somewhere in the second week of rain. He went into his waist at the bank, and then his chest as the grade dropped and he pushed toward the vehicle with everything he had. The flashlight held above the surface, his body running the gap between training and reality in real time. He reached the rear window. She was in the back seat with her head tilted all the way back, face angled up, chin barely above the waterline that was sitting at her collarbone and still rising. Her wrists were bound behind her with flex cuffs. Her dark hair floated around her face and neck. Her eyes were open, and they found his flashlight with the immediate, locked precision of someone who had made a decision somewhere in the rising water that they were not going to stop being present, and had been keeping that decision alive through pure, sustained will. She was conscious. She was tracking. And on her left shoulder, barely above the waterline, the eagle and trident and anchor and pistol of a Navy SEAL qualification badge. Caleb held the light steady and looked at her through the glass and the water and the terrible distance of a rear window between a person who needed to get out and a person who needed to get them out. She read his face. She read it the way operators read each other, not looking for comfort, but for information, for the assessment of the situation behind the eyes of the person on the other side of the glass. He held up one finger. 1 minute. I'm coming. She gave the smallest possible nod and tilted her chin back up. He went for the window. Atlas had not entered the water. He had positioned himself at the blown window seal with his front paws on the submerged door panel, braced, his teeth finding the fabric of the woman's jacket collar through the gap in the seal, with the specific, deliberate grip of a dog who had assessed his role in the situation and was executing it without being asked. Not pulling, holding, a fixed point in moving water. Caleb brought the tire iron around. The first swing spiderwebbed the glass. The second gave it. He cleared the frame with his forearm, and the pressure differential pushed water through in both directions, and he got his arms inside. "Can you hear me?" She turned her head toward him. Her focus was intact and absolute, and carrying the specific, earned quality of someone who had been maintaining it through significant physiological distress, and had not lost it, and was not going to. "Yes," she said. Her voice was compressed and hoarse, and completely without panic. "Wrists, behind me, flex cuffs. I can't." "I see them." He had his knife out. "What's your name?" "Quinn. Mara Quinn. Petty Officer First Class." She paused, and then, with the compressed precision of someone filing essential information before the window closes. "I'm assigned to DevGru. I was undercover. I need you to know that before anything else." The words DevGru landed differently than everything before them. DevGru. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The unit whose operations existed in the space between what the military acknowledged and what it did not. the unit whose members did not generally end up bound in base security vehicles at the bottom of drainage channels on routine November nights. He processed it without showing that he processed it, and kept moving. "I'm Caleb. I'm going to cut the restraints. When I say pull, you pull toward the window, not before." "Copy," she said. That word. Not okay. Not yes. Copy. The compact, automatic acknowledgement of an operator receiving instruction from another operator in a situation where economy of communication was the difference between what happened next going well and not going well at all. He cut the flex cuffs in one motion. Her arms came forward with the jerky, partially responsive movement of limbs that had been bound behind her long enough that the circulation was seriously impaired. She made a sound that she closed off in the same instant it surfaced, the brief, involuntary expression of pain that trained people suppress as fast as it appears. Her hands were white to the knuckle. "Through the window," he said. "Head first. Atlas has your collar." She moved toward the frame without hesitation. Her upper body cleared, and then her weight shifted, and the water took her, and Caleb's arms were under hers, and Atlas was swimming tight on her right side, and they were moving toward the bank together. She kicked the entire way. Her legs did not have full sensation, and she kicked anyway. They reached the bank. He got her onto the grass, and she sat up without assistance, and that told him the most critical thing he needed to know immediately. Core temperature dropping, circulation impaired, possible impact injury from the vehicle going in, but cognitively intact, present, operational. He stripped his blouse and got it around her shoulders. She pulled it closed. Her hands shook doing it. He crouched in front of her. "Are you injured beyond the cold and the cuffs?" She ran the rapid, methodical self-assessment of someone trained to deliver accurate damage reports. "Right side impact. When the car went in, I hit the door panel. Nothing structural. I've had worse." She looked at him. "How did you find me? The dispatch log was closed. I heard the call on the radio. They closed it before I went under." "Atlas," Caleb said. She looked at the dog. Atlas had come out of the water and was sitting pressed against her right side, sharing warmth with the specific, deliberate placement of an animal who had assigned himself a recovery function and was executing it. His amber eyes were calm and steady and carrying the uncomplicated certainty of an animal that had done what it came to do. She looked at Atlas for a moment, with an expression that had nothing performed in it. "Good dog," she said quietly. Atlas did not react to the praise. He was already looking back at the channel. "Mara," Caleb's voice dropped. "DevGru undercover. Here. What operation?" She looked at him with the measuring gaze of an operator, running a rapid trust calculation on a person she had never met, in a situation where the wrong read was not survivable. She was reading his rank, his unit insignia, his face, the way he moved, the way he cut the restraints, the way he had gone into the water without calculating the cost first. Whatever she found was enough. 11 months, she said. Infiltration of a logistics corruption network operating inside the base supply chain. Diverting weapons and equipment to unauthorized third-party buyers. I had the full financial architecture. Names, accounts, transaction records. The entire chain from procurement to transfer. She stopped. I was 48 hours from transmitting the complete package to my handler when they made me. Who made you? She said it without inflection. Commander Aldrich Vane. The name hit Caleb like a change in pressure. Commander Aldrich Vane. 15 years of decorated service. Joint Task Force Logistics Commander for the entire coastal base network. The man whose signature was on every procurement authorization that moved through the supply chain. Mara had just described spending 11 months mapping from the inside. The man whose base security detail had access to base patrol vehicles. The man who would have known exactly which language to use in a dispatch log to make an unattended vehicle report generate a file entry rather than a response team. Caleb looked at the channel, then back at Mara. "Is he on base right now?" She looked at him steadily. "He's not going to wait to find out the canal didn't finish it." Atlas pressed harder against Mara's side and turned his head toward the access road. His ears went fully forward. His breathing shifted to the compressed, suspended stillness that Caleb had learned to read as precisely as language in 2 years of operational partnership. Something was coming. Caleb's hand moved to his radio and stopped. The base security frequency was compromised. The dispatch log that had closed this location 20 minutes ago had been written by someone with access to that frequency. Using it now was the same as announcing their position to the person who had put Mara in that car. He looked at Atlas. Atlas looked at the road. Caleb made a decision. He pulled out his personal phone, bypassed the base network entirely, and dialed the one number outside the chain of command that he trusted completely. It rang twice. When his handler picked up, Caleb spoke 6 words before anything else. "I have a DevGru operator. Alive." The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. When the voice came back, it had shifted from the quiet of a man pulled from sleep into something operational and exact. "Talk to me," his handler said, and on the bank of a drainage channel off the coastal access road, with Atlas pressed against a woman who had spent 11 months inside a corruption network that reached into the command structure of an entire base, Caleb Thorne began talking. Caleb's handler was a man named Reyes, Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reyes, retired, now operating as a civilian liaison between active SEAL units and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. He was not someone Caleb called lightly. He was someone Caleb called when the chain of command was the problem. This was that situation. Reyes listened without interrupting for 4 minutes. That was one of the things about Reyes. He did not speak until he had the complete picture, and he did not ask questions that the person giving the report would have already answered if they had more time. He waited for the silence that meant the report was finished, and then he spoke with the compressed, operational precision of a man who processed information the way good engines processed fuel, completely and without waste. DevGru asset, 11 months. Bain's name on the chain. A pause. How credible is she? Caleb looked at Mara. She was sitting upright with his blouse pulled around her shoulders, her hands still working through the impaired circulation, opening and closing, with the methodical patience of someone running a physical recovery protocol they had done before. She was listening to his call without appearing to listen to it, which meant she was absorbing every word and filing it against her own assessment of whether Reyes was someone who could be trusted with what she had. "As credible as anyone I've pulled out of a drainage channel," Caleb said, "which is to say, completely." "Is she mobile?" "Getting there. You have maybe 30 minutes before whoever wrote that dispatch log expects a confirmation that the vehicle is fully under." Reyes paused. "You cannot be on that access road when they come to verify." "I know." "Caleb," Reyes's voice dropped to register. "If Vane's name is on this, his reach inside the base security network is total. Every channel you use that routes through base infrastructure is a channel he can hear. Your personal phone is clean for now, but the moment this operation goes active, assume it isn't." Another pause. "Get off that road. Get the asset somewhere I can reach you, and do not, under any circumstances, let her out of your sight until I have people on the ground." "How long?" 2 hours, maybe less. I'm making calls the moment we're off." The call ended. Caleb put the phone in his pocket and looked at Mara. She was already looking at him. "Reyes," she said, not a question. He blinked. "You know him?" I know of him. DEVGRU runs intersecting networks with NCIS liaison personnel. His name has come up in briefings. She paused. He's clean? He's the reason I'm still operating, Caleb said. Yes, he's clean. She absorbed that and nodded once with the compact, definitive acknowledgement of someone closing a trust assessment and moving to the next operational problem. Then we need to move, she said, because Vane is not going to wait 2 hours to verify this location. She was already trying to stand. Her legs were partially functional, the sensation coming back in the specific, brutal way it comes back after significant cold and prolonged positional restriction. She got one foot under herself and pushed, and Caleb was beside her before she needed to ask for it, his arm under hers, supporting without taking over. She took 2 testing steps. Her jaw was set. Her face showed none of what that cost. I can move, she said. I know, he said. Atlas fell in beside her left leg without being directed. His shoulder pressed against her calf, providing the specific, steady contact of an animal that understood she needed a physical reference point for her own balance, and had appointed himself that reference point without ceremony. She looked down at him for 1 second. He does that on his own? She asked. He decides what's needed, Caleb said. I mostly just confirm it. They moved up the bank and toward the vehicle. Caleb had the access road in his peripheral awareness for every one of the 90 seconds it took to reach the transport vehicle. Reading it the way you read a road when you know someone is going to come down it, and you need to be gone before they do. Nothing moved on it yet. The night was cold and quiet, and carrying the specific, false peace of a situation that was holding its breath. He got Mara into the back seat. Atlas jumped in beside her without being asked, and settled against her right side. She did not comment on this. She pulled the blouse tighter and looked out the rear window at the channel, and then turned back to Caleb as he started the vehicle. Where are we going? Maintenance depot 3 miles inland. I know the supervisor. He does not exist on any base personnel roster that Vane has access to, because he's been semi-retired for 4 years, and his credentials haven't been updated in the system. Caleb pulled onto the access road. He owes me something from a situation in 2021 that I am now collecting. Mara looked at him. You planned for this kind of situation? No, he said. I plan for the general category of situations where the chain of command becomes the threat. The specifics on building as we go. She was quiet for a moment. That's either very reassuring or very concerning. Both things are accurate, he said. Atlas pressed his nose against the rear window glass as they cleared the access road and turned inland. His ears stayed forward for 30 seconds and then gradually relaxed as the distance from the channel increased. He was still reading the environment behind them, cataloging what they were moving away from with the same focused attention he had given the water. He would not fully stand down until Caleb gave him the signal that the threat perimeter had been resolved. That signal was not coming yet. They were 2 minutes from the depot when Mara spoke again. The financial records are on a drive, she said. Encrypted. I had it on me when they took me. She paused. They took my gear, everything I was carrying. But the backup. She stopped. Caleb glanced at her in the rear view. Her expression was doing the specific work of someone running a calculation they had been running since before the car went into the water. A calculation with a result she had not yet said out loud, because saying it out loud required a degree of certainty she was still arriving at. The backup, he said. Before they got me into the vehicle, I had 4 seconds. She looked at her hands. The circulation was coming back now, the white receding from her fingers, the color returning in the uneven, tender way of blood finding its way back into compressed vessels. There's a waterproof pouch in the left shin pocket of my camis. I put the backup drive in it when I heard them at the door. I didn't know if it would survive the water. She reached down with hands that were still not fully under her control and worked the shin pocket open. The waterproof pouch was there, sealed, intact. She held it up. Caleb's eyes went to the rear view and held it for 1 second. The pouch was military grade, the kind rated for full submersion at operational depth. The kind that SEAL units used for exactly the kind of situation where important things needed to survive water that was not supposed to be survived. "Is the drive in there?" he said. She pressed the pouch between her palms and felt the hard rectangular outline through the material. "Yes," she said. The word landed in the vehicle with the weight of 11 months of undercover work that had survived a drainage channel, flex cuffs, rising water, and a dispatch log written to make sure none of it reached daylight. Caleb exhaled slowly. Atlas turned his head and looked at Mara, and then at the pouch, and then back at Mara, with the amber, steady attention of an animal that could not read the strategic implications of what was in that pouch, but had been calibrated to read the change in his handler's body language accurately enough to understand that the situation had just shifted in a significant direction. His tail moved once. Then he pressed his nose against Mara's shoulder and held it there for 2 seconds. She looked at the dog. Something crossed her face that was not operational and was not managed. It was the private, unguarded expression of a person who has been running on nothing but will for a very long time, and has just been offered the simple, grounding contact of an animal that does not evaluate whether they deserve it. She put her hand on Atlas's neck. He leaned into it. The depot appeared at the end of a gravel road 2 minutes later. The building was dark, but Caleb had sent a text while Mara was working the shin pocket, and by the time he pulled in, a single light had come on above the side entrance, and a man in his late 50s was standing in the doorway with a specific expression of someone who understood they were being asked to do something without being told what it was, and had decided to do it anyway. His name was Decker. He looked at Caleb, then at Mara, then at Atlas, and then back at Caleb. "Inside," Decker said. "Now." They were through the door and into the back office of the depot when Caleb's phone buzzed. Not Rhea's. Unknown number. Local base exchange prefix. He stared at it for 1 full ring. Mara looked at the phone. "Don't answer it." "I know." The call went to voicemail. There was no message. 3 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Same number, no message. Decker was watching from the doorway to the main depot floor. "That going to be a problem?" "Everything tonight is a problem," Caleb said. "This one specifically means someone is trying to confirm whether I'm reachable on a channel they expect me to be using." "Vane?" Mara asked. "Someone in his network. Testing whether I'm still on routine patrol and whether I've been on the access road tonight." "If you don't answer, they assume you have been." "If I do answer, they confirm my phone is active and triangulate the signal." Decker looked between them. "So neither option is good." "Welcome to the last 2 hours of our evening," Caleb said. He pulled the battery from the phone. Not the off switch, the battery. Because an off switch was a software instruction, and software had back channels that batteries did not. Mara was already doing the same with her own phone, the one the network had issued her for the undercover operation. The one she had been carrying for 11 months, and which Vane's people had not taken, because they had not searched her camis in the time between putting her in the car and driving to the channel. That error was the kind of error that arises from confidence, from the certainty of a man who believed the canal would resolve the situation, and who had therefore treated the preparation as a formality. His confidence was now their operational asset. She set both phones on the depot desk. Then she set the waterproof pouch beside them. "I need a secure connection to transmit this drive," she said to Caleb. "Encrypted, outside the base network, with a recipient address that routes directly to NCIS command without passing through any node Vane has visibility on." Caleb looked at Decker. Decker rubbed the back of his neck with the expression of a man who had been planning to spend a quiet night doing maintenance scheduling and was now being asked to become a node in a federal evidence chain. "The depot has a legacy communications system," he said slowly, "from before the base network integration in 2019. It was never decommissioned because nobody remembered to decommission it, and I never brought it up because I use it to run supply coordination with 3 off-base contractors who don't exist in the official procurement system." He paused. "It is completely invisible to anyone monitoring base network traffic, because as far as the network is concerned, it does not exist." Mara looked at him. "Show me," she said. Decker led them to the back corner of the depot floor, where a terminal sat on a metal shelf covered in the accumulated dust of deliberate neglect. He powered it on. The screen came up in the specific, outdated interface of a system that had not been updated since the mid-2000s and was running its original configuration with the patient, reliable indifference of old technology that has never been asked to be more than it is. Mara sat down in front of it, with the drive in her hand and 4 years of operational training in encrypted data handling and 11 months of watching how a logistics corruption network managed its own information architecture. She worked for 8 minutes without speaking. Atlas sat at her right heel for every one of those 8 minutes, his body angled toward the depot entrance, his ears making the slow tracking adjustments of an animal running continuous perimeter assessment. Caleb stood at the door to the main floor, with his eyes on the road visible through the high depot windows, reading the dark for headlights that were not supposed to be there. They came at minute 9. Not one vehicle. 2. No lights. Moving down the access road toward the channel at the specific, deliberate pace of people who were not responding to an emergency, but confirming the resolution of one. Caleb said, quietly and without moving, "Mara." 40 seconds, she said. He looked at the road. The vehicle stopped at the channel access point. He could see the faint, swinging arcs of flashlights at the bank. They were looking at the water, looking for a vehicle that should be fully under by now, looking for the confirmation that the dispatch log's closeout had been completed. What they were finding instead was a vehicle that had been in the water long enough to go under, but whose rear window had been broken from the outside, and whose bank showed the specific, compressed disturbance of multiple people and one large dog having recently exited the water in a hurry. They were going to know in approximately 90 seconds that the canal had not done its job. "Mara," Caleb said. "Done," she said. The transmission confirmation sat on the screen in green text. "Recipient confirmed. Package received. NCIS command acknowledgement. Timestamp 004117. She stood. Atlas rose with her. She looked at the screen for exactly 1 second, the expression of a person who has been carrying 11 months of work toward a single transmission point and has just delivered it, and is now experiencing the specific, stripped-down clarity of someone whose primary mission has been completed and who is now operating entirely in the secondary mission of surviving long enough for it to matter. She looked at Caleb. "They have it," she said. "Reyes will have it in 10 minutes, he said. NCIS command will have it in 20. "Vane is going to know the car is empty in about 60 seconds. "Yes." "And then he's going to know we transmitted." "Yes." She looked at him with the clear, level gaze of an operator who has just had the situation simplify itself into its essential elements. The drive was transmitted. The evidence was in federal hands. Everything that happened now was about whether the two people who had just done that and the dog who had started it survived long enough for the evidence to be acted on. "So," she said, "what do we do with the next 2 hours?" Atlas looked at the door. His ears went fully forward, and the 2 flashlight arcs at the channel bank had stopped moving. The flashlight arcs at the channel bank had stopped moving. That was the detail that mattered. Moving flashlights meant people still processing a scene. Still arcs meant people who had finished processing and had arrived at a conclusion. Caleb had been reading that kind of body language through 2 years of operational work, and he knew the difference between the stillness of confusion and the stillness of decision. These were the stillness of decision. "They know the car is empty," he said. "How long before they start running the access road?" Mara asked. "They're already running it in their heads." He turned from the window. "Decker, is there another way out of this depot that doesn't use the main road?" Decker had the expression of a man who had been running a quiet, semi-retired operation in a semi-forgotten building for 4 years and had developed a thorough understanding of every structural asset that semi-forgottenness provided. He did not hesitate. "Loading dock on the south wall. Accesses a farm service track that runs behind the perimeter fence for about 1.5 miles before it connects to the county road outside base jurisdiction." He paused. "It is not on any base map generated after 2017 because the perimeter fence was rerouted that year, and the track ended up on the wrong side of the updated boundary survey. Nobody drive it anymore. Can we drive it?" Decker looked at Caleb's transport vehicle. "If you don't mind what it does to the undercarriage." "I don't mind," Caleb said. Mara was already on her feet. Atlas was already beside her. The pouch was in her inside pocket. Whatever remained of the 11 months that had not been transmitted was now a secondary consideration. The transmission had happened. The evidence was in federal hands. Everything else was survival arithmetic. Decker led them through the main depot floor to the loading dock at the south wall. He had the dock door partially raised before Caleb finished pulling the vehicle around. The farm track was exactly what he had described. Narrow, uneven, running along the outside of the perimeter fence through terrain that had not been maintained in years. Caleb looked at it, then at Atlas in the rear view. Atlas was watching the depot entrance behind them. His ears had not come back down. "Go," Mara said. He went. The track was rough in the specific, unrelenting way of ground that has been ignoring vehicles for several years. The suspension took it without complaint, because military transport vehicles were built for exactly this category of terrain, and the engineers who designed them had not been optimistic about the conditions they would encounter. Caleb drove with his lights off, navigating by the ambient light that coastal sky in November provides, which is not much, but is enough for someone who has been trained to operate in less. Mara sat in the back with Atlas and did not speak for the first 3 minutes. That was unusual. She had been precise and economical with her communication since the moment he found her. But she had been communicating. The silence now had a different quality. He recognized it because he had felt it himself in the aftermath of operations that had required everything and delivered the result that everything was spent toward. It was the silence of a person who has been running at full operational capacity for a very long time and has just completed the primary objective, and whose body and mind are simultaneously trying to decompress and refusing to allow it because the situation has not yet resolved. 11 months, he said. Not a question, an acknowledgement. She looked at the window. "The first 3 were establishing cover," she said. "I was running a secondary identity inside the base supply chain. Civilian contractor, logistics analyst, specifically recruited by Vane's procurement office because my cover credentials matched what he was looking for." She paused. "He recruited me himself, sat across a desk from me for 40 minutes, and told me why I was the right person for the work he needed done. He was convincing, He was also describing the exact infrastructure I had been sent to map. Caleb navigated a section of track where the ground had subsided and the vehicle tilted at an angle that required his full attention for 15 seconds. When it leveled, he said, "How many people in the network above him?" "The drive has 11 names," she said. 3 active duty officers above Vane's rank. 2 civilian procurement directors with DoD clearance. The rest are commercial intermediaries who provided the buyer-side infrastructure. Shell companies, transport logistics, documentation forgery. She looked at her hands. The weapons were leaving the base in supply chain transfers that were documented as routine equipment rotation. Every record looked legitimate. Every signature was real. The only thing that made it visible was the volume discrepancy between what was being logged out and what was being received at the destination facilities. She paused. That discrepancy took me 4 months to build a clean evidentiary record around, because Vane had people inside the destination facilities too. Caleb said nothing for a moment. "How did he make you?" The question sat in the vehicle for 3 seconds. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the part I've been running since the car went in. I was clean operationally. My cover had held for 11 months. I had not transmitted anything that could have flagged my identity on any channel he monitored." She paused. "Which means either someone in my own chain told him, or he had a surveillance layer I didn't identify. Either way," she stopped. "Either way," Caleb said, "the breach is inside the operation." Yes. He drove that reality for a while without speaking. The farm track began to widen slightly where it approached the county road connection. Caleb slowed and cut the engine and sat for 30 seconds, listening. The night was quiet. No engines on the county road. No lights visible in the direction they had come from. He restarted and pulled onto the county road. His personal phone was still without its battery. Mara's phones were at the depot. They were running dark, and they were going to stay running dark until Reyes made contact through a channel that could not be intercepted, which meant they were operating in the specific, compressed discomfort of a situation that required them to trust a timeline they could not verify. 2 hours, Reyes had said. 53 minutes of those 2 hours had passed. Atlas shifted in the back seat. He turned twice and settled with his back against Mara's left leg and his chin toward the rear window, running the continuous, patient perimeter scan that was his default state when a threat was confirmed but not fully resolved. He was not agitated. He was not radiating the specific tension of an animal that has assessed a situation as immediately critical. He was simply working. Steady and awake, and completely committed to the task of knowing before Caleb did if something was coming behind them. Mara's hand had come to rest on Atlas's back, without her appearing to notice she had done it. Her fingers were curved into his coat, and she was looking at the road ahead with the focused, analytical gaze of someone who had not stopped working through the operational problem since the moment it became a problem. "Vane is going to move fast," she said. "He knows the drive was in my possession. He knows the transmission window was there if I survived and reached a clean channel." She paused. "He is currently doing the same arithmetic we are. He knows we have 2 hours before a federal response makes his position unrecoverable. He is going to spend those 2 hours trying to close the gap." "What does he need to close the gap?" Caleb said. "The drive, or us, or both." She looked at him in the rear view. "If he can recover the drive and eliminate both of us before Reyes's people arrive, the transmission can be challenged as unverified without living sources to authenticate the chain of custody. The evidence exists, but the case becomes contested." She paused. "He knows that. That's why he moved on me before I could transmit. He had one window to close this, and he missed it. So his second window is the next hour and 7 minutes. Yes. Caleb looked at the road. He was navigating toward a specific location that he had been building toward since he turned off the access track. There was a point 12 minutes from the county road connection where the base perimeter fence met an old maritime observation post that had been decommissioned in 2018 and sat in an administrative no-man's land between base jurisdiction and county jurisdiction. It was on neither authority's active patrol route. It had power because the decommissioning had not included a utility disconnect, which was the kind of institutional oversight that happened when the paperwork for decommissioning was filed in a different department from the paperwork for utility management. It had a hardwired landline phone that connected to the legacy maritime communication network, the same network category that Decker's depot terminal ran on. Caleb had known about it for 3 months. He had known about it because knowing about things that existed in the gaps between institutional structures was the specific, practical intelligence that kept you operational in situations where the institutional structures themselves had been compromised. This was that situation. He told Mara about it. She listened without interrupting and then said, "That's either the most reassuring thing I've heard tonight or the second most." What was the first? She looked at Atlas. He did not ask again. They were 4 minutes from the observation post when Atlas stood up in the back seat. Not a gradual alerting. Immediate. Full upright, ears locked, body angled toward the rear of the vehicle with the total committed attention of an animal that had just received information from the environment that superseded everything else in the current operational picture. Caleb's eyes went to the rearview mirror. Headlights. A mile back. Running without emergency lights but moving fast. Faster than county road traffic at this hour moved. Fast in the specific way of a vehicle that knew where it was going and needed to get there before a window closed. "Contact," Caleb said. Mara turned and looked out the rear window. She looked for 2 seconds. "One vehicle," she said. "Running dark except headlights. They're not on the road. They're on us." "How?" She turned back and looked at the depot track they had taken, running the calculation in real time. Then her expression changed. "Decker," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "He didn't call them," he said immediately. "He wouldn't. He doesn't have to have called anyone." Her voice was precise and without emotion. The voice of someone delivering an accurate assessment rather than an accusation. The depot has a legacy communication system that Vane's network doesn't monitor. But the depot also has vehicle sensors on the main access road. Standard facility security. If someone in Vane's network has passive access to facility sensor data, they don't need Decker to make a call. They just needed us to turn into the depot. Caleb processed that in 2 seconds. She was right. Passive sensor data. Not a phone call, not a betrayal. A sensor log that recorded a vehicle entering a depot at midnight and was monitored by someone in a network that had spent 14 months embedding itself into every layer of base infrastructure that produced exploitable data. They had been running dark. Atlas had been running dark. The sensor had not cared. "How close is the observation post?" Mara asked. 3 minutes. "How much time do we need once we're inside?" 60 seconds to reach the landline, another 30 to connect to the maritime channel. If Reyes is monitoring it, the way he monitors everything, 30 seconds after that to confirm our position to his response team. She looked at the rearview mirror. The headlights were closing. "We have 3 minutes to get inside, and 2 minutes before they reach the building," she said. "That's a 1-minute gap." "I know." "Atlas." She said the dog's name the way you say the name of something that is not a resource, but a partner. The way you say the name of someone you are about to ask something of, that you understand, has a cost. Atlas looked at her. "When we get out of this vehicle," she said, "I need you to give us that minute." Atlas held her gaze for 2 seconds with the amber eyes that processed everything they were shown, without the filter of sentiment. and delivered assessments that were accurate in the way that only completely honest things are accurate. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him in the rear view and understood the look, the way he had learned to understand Atlas's communications over 2 years of work that had taken him to places where the understanding was not a professional skill, but a survival necessity. The dog was not asking for permission. He was confirming the plan. "Okay," Caleb said. The observation post appeared at the end of a gravel offshoot from the county road. Caleb turned without braking, the vehicle pushing hard through the turn, gravel loud under the tires in the specific way of gravel at speed. He covered the 200 meters to the building and had the vehicle stopped and the door open in the same motion. They were out. The building was a single-story concrete structure with a steel access door. Caleb had a key that had come to him through a chain of custody that would take several paragraphs to explain, and was ultimately irrelevant to the current situation. The door opened in 4 seconds. Mara went through. Atlas did not. He stood at Caleb's left heel and looked at the county road where the headlights had just turned onto the gravel offshoot. Caleb looked at the dog. Atlas looked at him with the complete, steady, unambiguous certainty of an animal that has already decided and is waiting for the moment to execute the decision. Atlas. Caleb's voice was low. "If this goes wrong..." Atlas pressed his nose once against Caleb's right hand. Then he turned to face the approaching vehicle and stood in the cold November dark with every muscle in his body carrying the specific, anchored readiness of an animal that had been built and trained and shaped by 4 years of work for exactly the moments when the situation required everything it had. The headlights stopped 30 feet from the building entrance. 2 doors opened, and Atlas moved. Caleb did not watch Atlas go. He was already inside, moving through the observation post's main corridor toward the back communications room with the specific, focused urgency of someone who understood that the minute Atlas was buying them had a hard edge, and that edge was approaching faster than the arithmetic was comfortable with. The building smelled of concrete and salt air and the particular staleness of a space that had been holding the same air for several years with nobody to disturb it. Mara was ahead of him, moving with a speed that said her legs had recovered enough to be functional, and her operational instincts had filled in the remaining gap. "Back left," he said. "Utility room behind the main floor." She adjusted without breaking stride. Behind them, through the steel door that Caleb had pulled shut but not locked, he heard Atlas. Not barking. The specific, sharp vocalization of a dog running an engagement protocol. The sound Atlas made when the engagement was active and controlled and being executed with the precision of 4 years of training applied to a situation that required all of it. Caleb did not slow down. The utility room door was unlocked. The hard-wired terminal sat on a metal shelf in the back corner, exactly where he had left it 3 months ago when he had run a survey of the facility, during a period when he had nothing but time and the specific productive anxiety of someone who knew they were in a county where the wrong kind of trouble was possible, and wanted to know in advance where the exits were. He powered it on. The screen came up slowly. The legacy maritime network ran at the speed of technology that had been built to be reliable rather than fast. And reliability in the late 2000s meant approximately 45 seconds of boot sequence that could not be interrupted. 45 seconds. Mara stood behind his left shoulder, watching the screen, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her breathing controlled in the specific, deliberate way she had been controlling it since he pulled her from the channel. Outside, Atlas made the sound again, then a different sound. A human voice, sharp and involuntary. The sound a person makes when something has taken a controlled grip on something they need. Caleb stared at the boot screen and did not move. "He's good," Mara said quietly. It was not a reassurance. It was an assessment delivered by someone who had been reading Atlas for the last 90 minutes and had arrived at a calibrated conclusion about his capabilities. She sent it the way she said everything, because it was accurate. "I know," Caleb said. The screen finished loading. He keyed in the maritime channel access code from memory and waited for the handshake signal that would tell him the channel was live. The terminal had not been used in years. The maritime network it connected to ran continuously, regardless of whether any particular terminal was active, which was the fundamental design philosophy of legacy military communication infrastructure. It ran because it was supposed to run. Nobody had told it to stop. The handshake signal came back in 11 seconds. He keyed the transmission. "Reyes, this is Thorne. Channel 7 Legacy Maritime. I need you on this frequency right now." Static. 7 seconds of static that felt like considerably more. Then Reyes's voice, clear and immediate, and carrying the specific quality of a man who had been monitoring multiple channels simultaneously and had prioritized this one the moment it activated. "Thorne, I have you. What's your status?" "Observation post, Sector 9, County Jurisdiction Line. We transmitted the drive from Decker's Depot 40 minutes ago. Confirmation received. We are currently holding position with 2 individuals from Vane's network engaging outside the building." He paused. "Atlas is managing the engagement. How long to your people?" The pause on Reyes's end was shorter than Caleb expected. 22 minutes. I have 2 vehicles." Another pause. "You said 2 individuals. Vane is not with them?" "Negative. Vane is not here." "Copy. Thorne, listen to me. NCIS received the transmission. The package is authenticated and in federal custody. The case is active as of 40 minutes ago. Vane knows this. He knew it the moment the confirmation went through, and he knows his window for containment closed with it." A pause. "Which means the 2 individuals outside your building are not there to recover the drive." Caleb understood what that meant before Reyes finished the sentence. The drive was already in federal custody. Recovering it from Caleb and Mara now would not change the case. The case existed. The 11 names existed in a federal evidence file that Vane could not reach. The only thing recovering the drive and eliminating the witnesses would accomplish now was the one thing Vane could still affect: the testimony. Physical evidence required authentication. Documents required verification. Financial records required expert interpretation before a grand jury. All of those processes were contestable, delayable, manageable by a defense attorney with enough resources and enough institutional relationships to work the system. Living witnesses who had spent 11 months inside the operation were not contestable. "He's not trying to stop the case," Caleb said. "No," Reyes said. "He's trying to stop the testimony." Mara had heard it. She was standing at the door to the utility room with her right hand on the frame and her face doing the rapid, controlled processing of someone updating a threat assessment in real time and arriving at the new parameters without flinching. 22 minutes, she said. "Yes," Caleb said. She looked at the door to the corridor. Atlas made a sound that Caleb had not heard from him in 2 years of operational work. Not the engagement vocalization, not the alert. Something lower and more sustained. The sound of an animal that has fully committed to a controlled hold and is communicating to its handler that the hold is stable, but that the handler needs to arrive at this situation immediately. Caleb moved. He was through the utility room door and down the corridor and at the steel entrance door in 9 seconds. He pulled it open. Atlas had the first individual's right forearm in a controlled hold, the man down on one knee in the gravel, his right hand empty, and his face carrying the expression of someone who had made a calculation about a working canine that the working canine had rapidly corrected. The second individual was against the vehicle, hands up, with the specific, rigid stillness of a man who had watched what happened to his partner in under 3 seconds and had made the only rational assessment the situation offered. Atlas did not look at Caleb when the door opened. He maintained the hold with complete, anchored focus, his weight forward, his grip calibrated to the pressure that controlled without injuring, his body angled to cover the widest possible threat arc. Caleb read the scene in 2 seconds. Atlas, hold. Atlas held, did not release. The command was not release. The command was an acknowledgement that Caleb had the scene and Atlas could reduce his active engagement to monitoring while Caleb took the primary. He stepped out with his sidearm drawn and his voice dropping into the register he used when the communication needed to be received without ambiguity. Both of you, on the ground, face down, hands behind your heads. The man against the vehicle went down immediately. The calculation had already been made. The man in Atlas's hold was slower, working with an arm that had been controlled for 90 seconds and was operating on impaired mechanics. He got there. Caleb crossed to the first man and had his hand secured in 15 seconds. Then the second. Atlas maintained his position between Caleb and both individuals throughout, his body tracking the movement of each person with the patient, continuous accuracy of a system that did not take exits from an active threat assessment until the threat assessment was completed. When both individuals were secured and face down in the gravel, Caleb said, "Atlas, release and hold." Atlas released. He stepped back 2 paces and sat with his eyes moving between the 2 men in the steady, unhurried arc of an animal, running continuous monitoring. No longer actively engaged, but absolutely not done. Caleb crouched beside the nearer individual. He did not recognize the face. Base security contractor, the uniform suggested. But the uniform was the only thing about this situation that was what it appeared to be. "Who sent you?" he said. The man said nothing. "You're on county jurisdiction ground. The federal case that your employer is the subject of has been active for 40 minutes. The testimony of the individual in this building is the next target on your employer's list, and you are currently the mechanism." He paused. "The mechanism has options that the employer does not. I need you to think about that very carefully before you decide that loyalty to someone who put you here is worth what the next 48 hours are going to look like." The man looked at the gravel. Caleb stood, looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back at him with the amber eyes that had been doing this work since before the Channel Bank, and would keep doing it for as long as the work was needed. "Good work," Caleb said. Atlas's tail moved once, then twice. Then he turned his attention back to the 2 men on the ground, as if the acknowledgement was filed and the work was still current, which it was. Mara appeared in the doorway behind Caleb. She looked at the 2 individuals on the ground, and then at Atlas, and then at Caleb, with the expression of someone who had run the 90-second projection of what was happening outside the building and had arrived at an outcome that she had assigned a reasonable probability to, but had not been certain of. 20 minutes, she said. 19 now, he said. She looked at the 2 men. Are they going to be a problem for the next 19 minutes? No, Caleb said. She looked at Atlas. Atlas looked at the 2 men. No, she confirmed. Caleb pulled his personal phone from his pocket, reinserted the battery, and powered it on. The missed calls from the base exchange number were still logged. He looked at them without opening them. His own phone buzzed with an incoming call. Different number. Civilian number. Virginia area code. He answered it. Thorne. The voice on the other end was not Rhea's. It was a woman's voice, mid-40s, with the specific compressed authority of someone who occupied a position where authority was assumed rather than performed. This is Deputy Director Carlin, NCIS. I have the package. I have the names. I need you to tell me where Petty Officer Quinn is right now, and I need her protected and in federal custody within the next hour." Caleb looked at Mara. She had heard the name. Her expression changed in the specific way that expressions change when a person hears the name of someone who has institutional authority over their situation, and whom they have been trying to reach for 11 months through a chain of command that Vane had been compromising from within. "She's with me," Caleb said. "She's secure. I need to speak with her." He held the phone out toward Mara. She took it. She held it against her ear, and she said nothing for a moment, and he could see her running the same rapid trust assessment she had run on him at the Channel Bank, on Reyes on the phone, on Decker in the depot doorway. The assessment that 11 months undercover had made not a habit, but a survival function. Reading what was underneath what people said, when what was underneath was the only thing that mattered. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Then she opened them and said, "This is Quinn, authenticated. I'm ready to debrief." The relief in that sentence was not audible. It was not visible. It existed in a frequency that only someone who understood what 11 months of carrying something alone felt like would have been able to detect. Caleb detected it. Atlas pressed against her left leg. She reached down without looking and put her hand on the back of his neck and held it there while she delivered a 12-minute verbal debrief to the Deputy Director of NCIS, standing in a decommissioned maritime observation post on the jurisdictional boundary of a coastal base, where a 15-year logistics commander had built an 11-name weapons diversion network inside the supply chain infrastructure of the United States Navy, and had tried to bury the person who found it in a drainage channel at midnight. The federal vehicles arrived at minute 18. 4 of them this time. Lights running. No pretense of quiet arrival, because quiet arrival was for situations where the element of surprise was an asset. The element of surprise was gone. The drive was transmitted. The case was active. The witnesses were alive and talking to the deputy director. Quiet arrival was no longer the operational priority. Speed was. Reyes came out of the second vehicle. He was shorter than his voice suggested, gray at the temples, wearing civilian clothes over a federal credentials badge. He looked at Caleb the way people look at someone they have known for a long time through high-stakes situations without ever being physically in the same space until this moment. "You look terrible," Reyes said. "I've been in a drainage channel," Caleb said. Reyes looked at Atlas, sitting between the 2 secured individuals with the patient, monitoring stillness of a dog who had been working for 3 hours and had no operational interest in stopping. "And he looks fine," Reyes said. "He always looks fine," Caleb said. "It's his most irritating quality." Reyes almost smiled. He turned to the vehicle behind him and spoke to the agents climbing out. They moved with the compact, purposeful efficiency of people deploying to secure a scene rather than investigate one. 2 went to the secured individuals. 2 went to the observation post entrance. 2 went directly to Mara, who finished her call with Deputy Director Carlin and handed Caleb his phone back, and then stood and accepted the presence of the federal agents around her with the specific, grounded steadiness of someone who has been waiting a long time to hand a weight to people with the authority to carry it. Caleb watched her. Atlas watched her too. There was a moment, brief and unguarded, when she looked at the federal vehicles and the agents moving around her, and the specific, institutional machinery of a response she had been building toward for 11 months finally arriving, and her face did something that it had not done once in the 3 hours since he pulled her from the water. It let go. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't reading carefully, just the microscopic, specific release of a person who has been holding the full weight of a thing alone for a very long time, and has just been allowed to put it down. Atlas pressed his nose against her right hand. She looked down at him. "Hey," she said softly. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against her thigh for 3 seconds, the grounding behavior that Caleb had watched him offer to people in the specific aftermath of things that had cost them everything. She put her hand on his head and closed her eyes. Reyes appeared at Caleb's shoulder. "Vane," Caleb said. "NCIS team hit his quarters 8 minutes ago," Reyes said. "He was there. He is not there anymore." A pause. He knew the window was closing. He moved before we could lock the base. Caleb's jaw tightened. "How far does he get?" Reyes looked at him steadily. "With 11 names in federal custody and his financial architecture fully documented?" "Not far enough." Another pause. "But not 0, and not tonight." Caleb absorbed that. "He is still out there tonight," he said. "Yes," Reyes said. "Tonight, he is still out there." Atlas lifted his head from Mara's hand and turned to look at the road. His ears went forward in the specific, locked position that Caleb had learned to read as accurately as any instrument he had ever been issued. The night was not finished. Atlas did not look away from the road. That was the detail that cut through everything else happening around Caleb in that moment. The federal agents were moving. Reyes was talking into his radio. Mara was being guided toward the second vehicle by 2 NCIS agents, who were doing their jobs with the professional efficiency of people who understood the asset they were protecting. All of it was the right motion, the correct response, the institutional machinery finally arriving at the speed it should have arrived at 11 months ago. And Atlas was looking at the road, with his ears locked and his breathing suspended, and his entire body carrying the specific, calibrated stillness that Caleb had learned to trust more than any instrument, any briefing, any chain of command assessment he had ever received. "Reyes," Caleb said quietly. Reyes was still on his radio. "Reyes." His voice dropped to the register that cut through ambient noise without raising volume. "Atlas is indicating." Reyes went quiet mid-sentence and looked at the dog. He had never worked with Atlas personally, but he had read enough operational reports to understand what an active indication from a trained working canine meant in a field context. He lowered his radio. "Direction?" he said. "North access, the county road connection point." Reyes looked at his agents. 2 of them had already picked up the shift in Atlas's posture and were repositioning without being told. The automatic operational adjustment of trained people responding to a threat indicator before it was verbalized. Caleb moved to Atlas and crouched beside him. "What do you have?" he said quietly. Atlas exhaled once through his nose, short, controlled. His eyes did not move from the tree line along the north access road. Then Caleb heard it. Not a vehicle. Footsteps. Single individual, moving carefully, the specific rhythm of someone who had left their vehicle at a distance and was approaching on foot to avoid the noise and the headlights that had given the first 2 individuals away. Someone who had learned from the first approach and adjusted. Someone who had been close enough to watch the first approach fail. Caleb stood. "1 individual," he said, "on foot, north tree line." They watched the first contact go down, and they did not leave. Reyes processed that in 2 seconds. "That's not a contractor." "No," Caleb said. "It's not." Contractors followed instructions and went to ground when the instructions produced the wrong outcome. They did not stay. They did not watch and adjust and come back in on foot through a tree line at 2 in the morning after watching 2 colleagues get secured by a federal canine. The person moving through that tree line had a reason that was more personal than a contract. Mara had stopped moving toward the federal vehicle. She was standing between 2 NCIS agents, with her head turned toward the tree line, and her face was doing something that Caleb had not seen on it in the 3 hours since the channel bank. It was not the operational assessment face. It was the recognition face. the specific, involuntary shift that happens when a person encounters something their body identifies before their mind finishes the sentence. She knew who was in that tree line. "Mara," Caleb said. She looked at him. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were steady, and she said the name the way you say the name of something you have been building a case against for 11 months, and have been waiting to say, in a context where saying it meant something permanent. "Vane," she said. The tree line was 40 meters from the observation post entrance. In the dark, at that distance, it was a wall of shape and shadow. But Atlas had already turned his body 43 degrees north, and his nose was working in the rapid, tight cycles that meant he was not acquiring anymore. He had acquired. He was tracking. Reyes got on his radio immediately. Agents repositioned. The two vehicles shifted to provide cover angles. Everything moved with a compressed, urgent efficiency of a response team that had been deployed for a containment operation and had just received the information that the primary subject was on site. Caleb did not move toward the tree line. He watched Atlas. Atlas took one step forward, then stopped. His head was low, and his shoulders were forward, and his weight was distributed in the specific, anchored stance of an animal that was ready to move at distance, and was waiting for a single input before it committed. From the tree line, a voice. "Quinn!" Vane's voice had the specific, compressed quality of a man who was running out of options and knew it, and was reaching for the one thing he had left, which was the human tendency to hesitate when the voice on the other side belonged to someone who had held authority over you. "Quinn, I know you're there. Walk away from this. I can get you out. Whatever they promised you, I can deliver more. Your operation had a breach long before you identified me. That breach did not come from your end. There are things about this case that your chain of command is not going to tell you, and that I can." It was skillfully constructed. It offered doubt, which was the most effective tool available when physical options had been exhausted. It offered the possibility that the person she trusted most in this situation might be withholding something. It was the last move of a man whose every other move had failed. Mara looked at the tree line. Caleb watched her face. She was not tempted. That was the thing. There was no moment of hesitation, no flicker of consideration, no microscopic shift in her expression that suggested the words were finding any purchase at all. She had spent 11 months inside Vane's operational world. She had watched how he built things, and how he defended them, and how he dismantled the people who became inconvenient. She knew the architecture of his persuasion, the way she knew the architecture of his financial network. Both ran on the same principle. The appearance of a better option where no better option actually existed. She did not answer him. She looked at Caleb. He looked at Atlas. Atlas was already reading the tree line with the full depth of 4 years of tracking work. He had the individual's location triangulated from the voice, and the footstep pattern, and whatever the November air was carrying to him from that direction. And his body was communicating all of that in the specific, precise language of an animal who had been built to find things that did not want to be found. Caleb looked at Reyes. Reyes nodded once. Caleb said one word. "Atlas." Atlas moved. He covered the 40 meters between the observation post and the tree line in a time that Caleb had measured in training, and that still, after 2 years of watching it, registered as something that the eye processed as faster than the brain's prediction of fast. He did not bark. He did not announce. He moved through the dark with the total committed precision of an animal executing a protocol that had been practiced 10,000 times and was now being applied to a situation that the 10,000 repetitions had been building toward. There was a sound from the tree line. Not Atlas. The sound a person makes when something they did not see coming arrives at them with its full operational weight. Then Vane's voice, stripped of everything it had carried a moment ago. "Call it off. Call it off right now." "Atlas, hold!" Caleb said it at full volume for the first time tonight. Silence from the tree line for 3 seconds. Then, "I'm not armed. Tell your people I'm not armed." Reyes was already moving with 2 agents behind him, flashlights up, covering the angle into the tree line with the measured, controlled approach of people who had been told the subject was unarmed, and were treating that information as unverified until they had eyes on both hands. Caleb walked toward the tree line. He moved at a pace that was not urgent and not slow, the pace of someone who has been running toward a conclusion for 3 hours and has arrived at it, and is completing the final distance with the steadiness of a person who no longer has anything to hurry toward because the thing has already been determined. He stepped through the tree line. Reyes and his 2 agents had Vane against the trunk of a large pine, hands visible. Atlas sitting 4 feet in front of him, with his eyes locked on Vane's center mass, and his body in the specific, anchored post-engagement stance that said the engagement was concluded, but the assessment was ongoing. Vane was 53 years old, and 15 years of decorated service had shaped him into exactly what long, unquestioned authority and the absence of meaningful institutional oversight produced in a man who was also intelligent, and also patient, and also fundamentally willing to operate without the constraint of the values the institution believed it had instilled in him. He was breathing hard. His hands were at shoulder height. His face was doing the rapid, sophisticated calculation of a man whose last available move had just failed, and who was now building the legal architecture he was going to need for what came next. He looked at Caleb. He did not look at Atlas. "You understand," Vane said, his voice already reorienting toward the register of a senior officer addressing a subordinate, "that what you have tonight is a chain of evidence that originated with a compromised undercover operative whose authorization chain had documented irregularities that my defense—" "Commander Vane," Caleb said. Vane stopped. "You're under arrest," Caleb said. "Everything else is for a different room." Vane looked at him for a long moment. The calculation ran behind his eyes. Caleb could see it running. The assessment of whether there was anything left to say in this situation that changed what the situation was. There was not. Reyes stepped forward, and the arrest was executed with the quiet, impersonal efficiency of a process that had been building for 11 months and was now completing in a tree line in November at 2 in the morning, because a dog had refused to stop reading the access road when the humans around him had decided the scene was resolved. Atlas did not move until Vane was cuffed and being walked toward the federal vehicles. Then he turned and walked back to Caleb. He sat at Caleb's left heel and pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg, and looked up at him with the amber eyes that recorded everything and forgot nothing, and had been reading this night correctly since the moment they arrived at the Channel Bank 3 hours ago. Caleb put his hand on the back of the dog's neck and held it there for a moment. "Good work," he said. Atlas leaned into the contact for 3 seconds. Then he straightened and turned to watch the federal vehicles and the agents moving around them, with the calm, patient attention of an animal whose primary mission was complete, and who was now in the monitoring phase that followed every completed operation. Mara appeared beside Caleb. She had come through the tree line behind the agents and was standing in the specific, grounded stillness of a person who has just watched the final element of an 11-month operation conclude in a pine tree line on a cold November night, and is experiencing the specific, complicated quality of that conclusion. She did not speak immediately. Neither did Caleb. Atlas looked at Mara. His tail moved once. She crouched beside him and put both hands on his face and held it the way you hold the face of an animal that pulled you from a sinking car in cold water, and then spent the next 3 hours making sure the reason you were in the car in the first place did not get to finish the work. 11 months, she said to the dog. Not to Caleb, to Atlas. And it comes down to 60 seconds in a gravel lot. She paused. That was your 60 seconds, not mine. Atlas pressed his nose against her cheek. She closed her eyes and let it ground her, the way the grounding behavior was designed to ground. The specific, physical reset of forehead and nose and warmth, and the uncomplicated presence of an animal that does not evaluate whether you deserve comfort before it offers it. She opened her eyes and looked at Caleb. The breach in my chain, she said. Reyes is going to find it. And when he does, it's going to go higher than Vane. I know, Caleb said. This isn't finished. No, he said. It's not. She stood. She looked at the federal vehicles where Vane was being processed and where the agents were moving with the organized, purposeful energy of people who understood they were the first hour of something that was going to run for a very long time. Then I'm staying, she said, until it is. Caleb looked at her. The deputy director cleared your return to active duty? She cleared my debrief. Active duty follows the debrief. Mara looked at him steadily. But the debrief leads directly into the task force investigation of the 11 names. And the task force is going to need a primary source inside the operational architecture. She paused. I am the primary source. Caleb understood, completely and without needing the rest of the sentence. You were inside for 11 months, he said. I know where every financial transfer originated. I know which names signed which authorizations. I know the commercial intermediaries by their real identities, not their shell company names. She paused. Vane is the arrest that opens the case. The 11 names are the case. And that case needs someone who can walk the investigators through every layer of it from the inside. She looked at Atlas. And something else, she said. Caleb waited. When I was in that car, she said, the water at my chin, with no exit and a dispatch log that had already filed me away, I made a decision that I was not going to let it be the last thing I did. That whatever it cost, I was going to finish what I started. She paused. He found me because he refused to accept the dispatch log. He found the drive in moving water at night without a command. He held 2 individuals in a gravel lot to give us 60 seconds we needed. She looked at Atlas with the expression of someone who has been trying to find the right language for something and has just located it. He didn't let it be the end either. And whatever comes next, whatever the 11 names produce and however long it runs, I want to be in a room with a dog that knows how to refuse the convenient version of events. Reyes was walking toward them from the vehicles. He looked at Caleb, then at Mara, then at Atlas, who was sitting at the precise midpoint between both of them, as if he had made a calculation about where the center of the current situation was and had positioned himself accordingly. Debrief starts in 4 hours, Reyes said. NCIS Regional Office. Both of you, he paused. And someone needs to tell me how a K9 tracked a DevGru commander through a tree line at night based on a voice he'd never heard before. He didn't track the voice, Caleb said. Reyes looked at him. He tracked the intent, Caleb said. He's been doing it since the Channel Bank. He read every person who came near her tonight, and he knew before any of us did which ones were the problem. He looked at Atlas. He always knows. Reyes studied the dog for a long moment. Atlas looked back at him with the amber eyes that held what they held without performance or agenda. The complete, honest record of everything that had happened since the moment they stopped on the access road and followed a signal that the dispatch log said did not exist. All right, Reyes said finally. He sounded like a man revising a category he thought was settled. 4 hours. Bring the dog. He turned and walked back to the vehicles. Mara looked at Caleb. He always knows, she said quietly, repeating it not as a question, but as a thing being confirmed, placed into the record of a night that had produced more confirmations than any of them had arrived at it expecting. Always, Caleb said. Atlas stood. He turned once toward the north tree line, where Vane had been. He stood there for 3 seconds, reading whatever the air and the ground and the November dark still had to say about that direction. Then he turned back and fell in at Caleb's left heel, with the clean, automatic, unhesitating placement of an animal that has completed an operation and is returning to its primary position. The federal vehicles moved out, one by one. The observation post stood empty behind them, its hardwired terminal still running, its legacy channel still open, carrying nothing now except the quiet, continuous signal of a network that had been built to run regardless of whether anyone was using it. And that had been exactly what they needed, in the exact moment they needed it. In the coastal base 12 minutes away, the procurement records that Vane had spent 15 years building into legitimate-looking architecture were already being pulled by NCIS agents working from the financial map on the transmitted drive. 11 names were in the beginning stages of the process that would end with each of them in a room with federal attorneys and evidence they could not contest. The weapons that had moved through the supply chain would be traced. The buyers would be identified. The shell companies would be unwound. The work was long. The work was just beginning. And it had begun because a dog on a coastal access road at 11:14 on a November night had pressed his nose to a 2-inch gap in a vehicle window and refused to accept what the dispatch log had filed away. Had gone to the water without being told it was possible. Had stayed at the bank until the truth came back up. Loyalty does not negotiate with convenience. It does not accept the version of events that has been written to make inconvenient truths disappear. It does not move on. It does not stand down. It does not file a log entry at 11:14 and go home. It goes to the water. It stays there. And when the water tries to take something that matters, loyalty reaches through the glass and pulls it back, and does not stop pulling until the thing is safe and the people who put it there have been found, and the record has been corrected, and every name that was supposed to disappear is standing in a room answering for exactly what they did. Atlas had always known that. He had known it from the moment the access road appeared and the air told him what the dispatch log was lying about. And everyone who had been in that drainage channel on that November night, and in the depot, and in the observation post, and in the tree line, already understood it. Some things do not go under, no matter how cold the water is, no matter how long the log says they were never there.